Right, so welcome back everyone. We are now going to finally carry on with our second talk. So we've now got Snowplow Analytics Vice President of Engineering, Steve Coppin-Smith, who's going to be talking to us about, giving us an introduction to behavioural data collection. So away you go. You're muted. Still muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much for the introduction. That all sounded very grand. I'm just saying it's difficult to follow something as heartwarming and positive, something that's bringing so much positivity to the world as accessibility is with the topic of data. But I do want to talk a little bit about it today and just some of the things to be optimistic about in data over this next period. And I have to apologize. I'm following a talk on accessibility. I mumble. I use long sentences, I use long words that I don't need to use. So I'm going to try very hard because this is also a challenge for me. I really want to be able to cover quite a lot of ground in not a lot of time that we have available. So I'm going to try and keep things very slow, very steady, very clear for everyone. So I work for a company called Snowplow. We are a data company. We provide data pipelines and management services around those pipelines. I'd originally called this talk an introduction to behavioral data collection, and we've already changed in the space of 2 months how we think about data. And I'll start there. We now refer to ourselves as a behavioral data management company. We were talking to a global research company and some investors, and they agreed that we're in this new category, and it's really exciting for us. They're breaking new ground, and it's a real champagne poppable moment for us. And we're very keen to start talking about it, but I can only imagine how this feels for the rest of the data community when they're thinking, okay, another thing to learn, yet another thing to learn in the data sphere. And I sympathize. I feel exactly the same. There's so much that's confusing about data. And it's hard enough already with all the varying semantics and techniques and opinions out there. And definitely I saw the I did a presentation, I thought it was last year, but I looked at the data, I think it's actually spring of 2019, at a Code Harbour down in Folkestone on testing tracking strategies around behavioral data collection, and realized that I hadn't introduced behavioral data, I hadn't introduced the challenges of tracking it, and I hadn't introduced automated testing. So there's an awful lot of kind of prerequisite knowledge that you need in order to be able to get something like behavioral data. So the data landscape is moving incredibly fast, and it's incredibly confusing, and we're totally adding to it. And I think that's why I feel compelled to kind of try and help and to try and get out there and make some of these complex things easier to understand. And as Alex said, I'm Steve. I'm VP of Engineering at Snowplow, and I've been there since December 2018. But even with all the advantages I have of working for a data company and being surrounded by data experts, I'm still a struggling data person. There's still so much that I don't understand about data. I like to think that I know how to run an engineering team, and I know more about building data pipelines than I've ever known before, but there's still so much to learn about the way that data is used and some of the advantages that it's giving the companies who are using it. So this presentation really is something I'd known about behavioral data 2 years ago when I started. And I borrowed heavily from a couple of presentations given by my colleagues recently, one from the CPO Yali Sassoon and another from my colleague Archit Gayal. And they're both fantastic speakers on data. So if you can find any talks by them, I really recommend it. Very articulate on all things data. So I'm going to break down what we mean by behavioral data management. I'm just going to spend a brief moment on data because, of course, you all know what data is. Data has had a rough 2020. Whenever I think about working in data, I don't know if you're familiar with the Mitchell and Webb sketch where they sit around and it's the hands, are we the bad guys or are we the baddies, I think it is, sketch. And that's kind of how it feels working in data this year when there's so much happening in data and you think you need to keep checking yourself, make sure you're one of the good guys. So on the darkest side of data, we've seen data undermining democracy. I mean, I wrote this slide before last night, and it turns out you don't need data, you just need one person to undermine democracy now. You have filter bubbles, causing self-affirming echo chambers. It's very easy to think that that's only happening on one side of every argument, but you're wrong. It's happening on both sides of every argument. We have these filter bubbles showing us the content that we expect to see. It's driving digital addiction. If you haven't seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix yet, I highly recommend going and watching it. It's really interesting to see what some of the big data collectors are doing and how they're using data and how that's influencing our society. And almost constant and impactful leaks. And quite often when you hear about data leaks, it's like, oh, yeah, there's another one. These leaks really hurt people. They cause a lot of anxiety. We've spoken about mental health already this evening. If someone learns that their data has been leaked and their bank details are out there on the internet, that can create an awful lot of concern and damage for people. So they really hurt people and they happen far too often, but there is a lighter side to data. You can see data driving positive social change. There's a lot of data being used in the health and fitness space, trying to get people moving and get exercise, which of course this year has been really important. Improving efficiencies of businesses. There's a great example. I started talking to someone at a conference once that was using data to track the mobilization of equipment around their building sites, so they knew where a certain piece of machinery was, how much charge it had, when it was used, when it needs maintaining. Whereas previously they'd say, well, does anyone know where this thing? No, okay, we need to go and buy another one. So it's helping organizations to become more efficient. Some fantastic green initiatives. One of my favorite projects there is a ride sharing company I think they were based in Hamburg. They may have expanded out now, but it's basically traveling salesperson problem on steroids. They've drawn a grid across the city, and you can go to any point on the grid, and I think these points are no more than a few hundred meters apart, and hail an electric car to come and take you from one point on the grid to another point on the grid. So you've got data being fed in about who's where they need picking up from, where they're going to be going, where the cars are, how much charge they have, how long that person has left on shift, bringing all of that data together, putting it through algorithms and making that work. And yeah, there's some really great stuff that's happening in agriculture as well around green initiatives. But most of us are just trying to build great user experiences, and there's a lot to be said for that. And especially building on the last talk with regards to accessibility, making sure that your site is working for everyone who's using it, whether they have disabilities or not. And that last one, the great user experiences, this is becoming increasingly important. There was a study recently that said that the top 3 things that CEOs are concerned about in a post-COVID world are having resilient business operations, customer experience programs, and data programs. So customer experience is second there in the list of the top 3. The data option isn't going to slow down, but it is going to evolve to ensure less of the former and more of the latter, which I'm pleased to say is where Snowplow operates. But yeah, it's going to change, and we can already start to see the things coming into play that will hopefully move us further away from the left and further towards the right. Another thing that's really exciting about data is how people are using it is going to be the new battle to be won in 2020 in data. I should have scoped that in data. So when data first started to be adopted as a discipline, it was really about using data to validate decisions, to say, okay, did they come through this test? What side of it were they on? Were they successful? Were they not successful? But it's really trying to validate a decision that's already been made. As you go up the data maturity curve, those companies are starting to use data to drive their decisions. So not rely on their own intuition, but then look at the data and say, this is really interesting that the users are trying to do this. If we just build this other part of the journey, then we'll be able to complete it for them. The next challenge is to try and do that rapidly. So not to try and build out custom use cases for every question that you want to ask, but how do you take your data asset and then pivot that towards a new problem? And then I couldn't really decide which was the next on these two, but the next challenges to be won are to use that data to drive decisions at scale, which comes with its own problems, and using data to drive the solutions themselves. I'm starting to venture into the management piece, and before I talk about that, I want to talk about the behavioural piece in behavioural data management. So you can consider that there are 3 broad types of data. There's transactional data, which is the data that a lot of us are most likely used to using. Things like information on users, on stock, on orders, purchases, products. It's a very mature market. It's been data has been obviously gathered and used to drive systems there for a long time. There's demographic data from companies like Nielsen and Clearbit, which can be used to tell you either more about the activity that you're seeing or the users that you have in your service, or to gather information on markets and what's happening around you. And then the third type, or the third tranche, is behavioral data. So this is more looking at app interactions, email open, support contact, any digital interaction that someone might have with your business. And like I said, I'm a struggling data person. It takes me it's taken me on a journey working with Snowplow for 2 years, trying to understand why behavioral data is important. It's only very recently that I had a really big aha moment. We we have we had an intern over the summer called Ada, based out in Greece, and she's now a full-time member of the team, I'm really pleased to say. And one of the things that she did that really impressed us was to build a content recommendation engine based on Snowplow data. I used to be a software engineer and worked with a lot of content publishers, and every content recommendation engine I've ever built has been based on most viewed content that has a common author assigned tag. Using behavioral data, Ada was able to quickly produce something that used the content absorbed by users who spent time with the number of articles that you've been spending time with in the last period, which is just so much more powerful. So you could say, I've just been in these on these 3 pieces of content, compare that to other users and look at the last 3 pieces of content that they viewed before they got to the bit that I'm looking at. I want to know how long they spent on it as a measure of engagement, how far down it did they get, and how recent was this. And you can build in all of that colorful information to come out with a much better list than any content recommendation engine I've ever built would have come out with. So it's really powerful stuff, and it's quite hard to picture now even how behavioral data can influence a project like this or a feature like this unless you send behavioral data. So this is a page on our website, and I'd really recommend going and playing with it. It shows what we mean by behavioral data. So behavioral data is events. Each event, and I don't know whether this is legible. I hope it is, but you should be able to see that there's a line here describing a few users' different journeys. You can see page views, page pings, and there are link clicks in there as well. And there's an awful lot of columns here that I'm not showing, but you've got a lot of information about event timing, where it happened, where they arrived from, information about the user, including their location, identifiers to stitch journeys together. On the page pings, we've got, and this is something that not all providers will give, but we've got page information on the page ping that tells what the scroll depth is, whether it's horizontal or vertical scroll depth, and you can use that as a key measure for engagement and how far down the page that user is getting and how long it took for them to do so. So yeah, that's behavioral data. That's what we mean by behavioral data. It's having a record for anything that happens in the service, having a line in there in the database with all of this metadata that describes what that action was. So most companies will have basic behavioral data, and this is good. This is a really good place to start from. So they'll have information on clicks and page views. But one of the problems you can have is if you had a data asset that looked like this, just a load of clicks and page views, and maybe you have some more transactional content, things like users, content, and subscriptions. If you were to be asked the question, what's common about the content that's driving subscriptions, you'd have to go through all of these, find out which ones are part of a session that eventually subscribed, try and find the IDs from these things and cross-reference them with your data storage to be able to pull out more metadata about them, to find what's common about them in order to be able to answer that question. It's a ton of work. Lots of people have their different interpretations and ways to do it. And it becomes very difficult for any data analyst to be able to answer that kind of question. It becomes a real chore. So fewer people will go further and start building their own behavioral asset. And by that, I mean designing their own tracking strategy and how they want to use that data. So rather than just having page views and clicks, you can also introduce things like pings, and you could have an impression event or a subscription event, and then you know what you're looking for. I'm just going to pull out that one. I'm going to build the rest of the data story around that. We have these 2 concepts at Snowplow. We have the event itself, but also we have entities. You can consider entities like objects. So you can have a user object with information about the user, article object, or an object to represent the advert that someone's seen. And you can attach these onto the event as well. And this helps you to narrow in on those stories, as I said, and narrow in on those journeys to be able to answer these questions more rapidly because you have it better described. And when I say people should build their own behavioral data asset, that ownership piece is nuanced as well. It's important when designing a tracking strategy to understand that news publications aren't the same as dealerships. Car dealerships aren't the same as clothes shops, and clothes shops aren't the same as other clothes shops. So actually investing in designing your own tracking strategy will become a competitive advantage later when you start to use this data to drive your business. Another important thing to think about is then how that data is going to be modeled in order to be able to answer these questions. It's worth stopping to say that when I say data modeling, or when Snowplow says data modeling, we mean data preparation, but it's another example of one of those phrases in data that gets used that means different things depending on the context that you're talking about. So machine learning, people talk about training models. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about modeling. We talk about the preparation of data. And yes, so if I have this behavioral data set and it's separated, the behavioral data itself is separated from the modeling that I want to do, it gives me an opportunity to slice and dice this data in different ways. So if I want to orient my analytics by article, I can start there, or if I want to do it by micro conversions, I can do that as well. So it's really important to have that tracking or that data asset that is designed for your business, designed around the way that you do business, and prepped to answer the questions that you want to answer, but not tightly coupled with them. By keeping them separate, it means that you can come up with the questions later. If you want to learn more about modeling, and I really think that all of this stuff is easier to do when you can actually see it in action. It's very hard to articulate and very hard to talk about, but if you can see it in action, it tends to make a lot more sense. We have another page on our website that you can go to and just see how that data that I showed you before can be modeled. And I think in this one, it's oriented around the content and showing the most performant content on our website, I think, actually. So deriving an ongoing value from a data asset is hard. So building an initial data strategy that you're happy with is a tricky thing to do in itself. But if you do it, and if you do it right, then that data asset will continue to increase in value over time, um, because of the amount of data that you're putting into it. But as you try to iterate around it, there's every chance you're going to do something that's going to compromise that data asset later. So it is really important to invest in that tracking strategy, not just your first one, but also invest in your tracking strategy going forward. And certainly as an organization grows in its adoption of data, it becomes harder to establish a common strategy for data collection across the company, to socialize any changes to that strategy, to control access, manage the control of access to data to make sure only the people who should access data can. Control costs. Like anyone who works in data, you know how easy it is as soon as you start to get other teams around the business using it who might not understand the way the data is structured, or the way that clouds bill, they can start putting together very complicated queries that you don't realize have cost you thousands of pounds before you know it. And another thing that's really interesting is how you have to manage the increased dependency and expectations on a data project. We work with a lot of companies where we work with a single team who kind of they really know what they're doing, and they really want to move forward with the data project. But as that project gets more and more eyes on it and more successful, more people will start to depend on it. I had a really interesting experience. It was one of the first things I did at Snowplow. I hopped on a customer call, and there was a problem with their pipeline over the weekend, and we said, hey, good news, we didn't lose any data. And we gave ourselves a real pat on the back. We didn't lose any data. That was brilliant. And they said, we couldn't care less. The data wasn't in our report when we needed it, and we've already run it and we've already issued it. And that was really interesting because the game had changed very quickly there, where the expectations on this data was that it was going to be there, and it was going to be there exactly when they needed it. So it wasn't okay for it to be complete one day, it had to be complete today. That starts to bring me on to behavioral data, also the management piece of behavioral data management. So you should only feed machines high quality data. So if you wanted to go into something like machine learning, or if you wanted to put some kind of decisioning on the end of your behavioral data, it's really important that that data is high quality. So what quality means, and you can structure it, you can break it down into lots of different things, is that it means it's expected. The service knows what to expect from the data, which means it needs to be described. It needs to be well structured in a way that's easy for it to use and cheap. It needs to be rich in data, and perhaps not all originated in the source. We have an enrichment process that happens post-collection that allows you to cross-reference your event with other data sources and bring in more information. It needs to be valid, so you don't want your services downstream to be having to make lots of decisions about what to do if a certain event is valid or not, and to be handling errors. You want everything to be clean, but if you want everything to be clean, that suggests that you're going to be throwing stuff out, so you need to find a way to be able to bring things in, so you still have a or failed events in, so you still have a complete data set as well. And it also needs to be timely, and a lot of people in data are talking about real time, but actually real time doesn't really matter for a lot of people in data. What it needs to be is there when you need it. So you don't necessarily need sub-second latency in order to be able to feed some machine learning. It just needs to be there when it needs to be. And that really varies from project to project. And even if you're not doing machine learning, like, you should only feed your data teams high quality data as well. And this one's very simple. It's because they have better things to do than to clean and wrangle data. They want to be out there doing interesting things with that data, not trying to clear it up after it's been collected. I'm going to not say too much on this, but I'm just going to plant a seed because it's very true, but I don't have time to go into it today, which is that you're going to want to understand what's happening to your data. I just got a message actually whilst in the break from a friend who's leaving WhatsApp because WhatsApp is now under a new data agreement that means that the data can be shared back with Facebook, I believe. I'm not completely clued up on this, but he sent something with all the data points that are coming across those two platforms. And it's really important that there's going to be more sensitivity to this, more sensitivity to leaks, more sensitivity to what people are collecting and how it's being used. So understanding what's happening in your data asset is really important. So I said I'd do a quick demo, and I said that without being entirely sure what I was going to show, but I've figured it out now. And what I'm going to do is just show you on our website, show you our own tracking strategy. So this is the Snowplow website. This is the browser console here. Just checking actually, can someone confirm that they can still see?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. So I've got a plug-in to the console here, so I can see the Snowplow events coming in. So if I just refresh our homepage, you'll be able to see we have a couple of page views. So actually you'll see 3 page views. That's because we're emitting it 3 times to 3 different pipelines. We have services on AWS, GCP, then we're also sending it to a test pipeline. But you'll see we have a few page view events. I'm going to, oh, by the way, if you're interested in seeing those pages I showed with the data, I've lost them now. Resources, explore granular data and model raw data. They're the 2 ones that are really interesting to go and have a play with. But if I go through to our documentation, which is another site, and then have a look at one of the page views, and then you can see here the structure of an event. So this is the page view that just fired when I came over to this page. You can see some of the core data around it. It's got an event ID, it's got a timestamp. This is the state that it's coming from. So if you have a multi app estate, so say you're a game designer and you've got the game, you've got the app, you've got the website, you can have different app IDs to show where that data is coming from, so you can cross-reference it with your other platforms. You've got tracker versions and tracker name, just trying to pick out some interesting things from here. Performance timing coming through with every event. This one's interesting. I'll just pause on this quickly. So we've got 2 ways to identify users. One is the domain user ID and the one is the network user ID. Most data collection platforms will need to use the domain user ID because they track in what's called a third-party context. So when you hear about third-party tracking, that's the kind of thing that the big players are doing, where they're tracking people around the internet. And there's a program of work happening in data called ITP, if you hear about that, and it's governing the way that cookies are set. And certainly Safari have moved very quickly on this and made it so that if you're trying to set cookies in a third-party context, they won't last very long. And the way that Snowplow works is we set up a data collection platform, a pipeline for each of our customers that's spun up under the same domain. So when they set a cookie, it's set from the server side and set from a server that's sitting on the same domain. So it can be set in what's called a first party context, which means it can last for longer, it can last for years, and not the 7 days that's restricted on Safari. That's really important if you want to do things like track anonymous users. So if you're a retail website where people are likely to come 1 week and then disappear for a while and come back another week and they haven't logged in, so you've got no other way to identify them, it's really important that you have some kind of identifier in order to be able to stitch those two journeys and measure the difference between the two journeys and see what it was that made them return. There's some other things in here like the refer URL. So I came from our main website, I'm now on the docs website, that's in there. So yeah, I mean, if you ever come across if you want to spend some time with our website, the plugin you can find is provided by one of our partners out in Australia called Poplin, and you can have a little nose around some of the data that's being collected. It's very easy to get started with Snowplow as well. We have trackers in all the languages that you'd expect to see, and it's often with all the trackers, it's easy to drop them into the site and to kick off some auto tracking, but it really gets interesting when you start to define your own behaviors and to emit those through the trackers. And they're like SDKs. We've invested a lot of time making them easy to adopt and easy to start sending events through. So that's a quick nose around some data and some of the data that was being emitted from my session there. Go back to the presenter view. Move that one. Open that back up. Can you still see okay? Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, if you wanted to learn more about behavioral data, the growing role of data or the importance of managing that data asset, you can learn more through our website. We've got a lot of stuff on our blog, in our use cases, and our webcast. There's a really good webcast that we did with a competitor of ours, Heap, on implicit versus explicit tracking. So tracking everything versus being careful about what you track, or being intentional about the way that you track, and trying to design your own journeys. We're on that side of the equation. There's the Explore Granular Data page and the Data Modeling Introduction page, which are both really interesting and very good to get an understanding of what we mean by behavioral data and how you might use it. If you wanted to get hands-on with Snowplow, there's a few ways to do it. It is an open source project, so we have lots of code out there available and things that you can spin up. One of those things is called Snowplow Micro, which is basically if you want a local Snowplow experience, it's a very simple emulator of Snowplow pipeline. There's Snowplow Mini, which is a single instance version of the Snowplow that you can spin up in the cloud, and it loads into Elasticsearch and provides a Kibana query interface as well. We have a new experience that we're just working on at the moment, and it should be general availability middle to end of this month, called Try Snowplow, which is a much easier way to spin up a Snowplow pipeline, and we provide a UI through which you can do it with some very simple instructions that you need to perform in AWS to spin up a data collection platform with a Postgres database, which also gives you the opportunity to do some work with that data and to start doing some rudimentary modeling with it. And if you're feeling really adventurous, the core pipeline is open source, but it will take quite a long time to spin up a full open source pipeline, but it's all there if you wanted to. So that's a whistle-stop tour to a very complicated topic, and I don't know how much of that was useful. I wanted to challenge myself in putting this presentation together to see if I could, in what was that, 20 minutes, try to articulate the world of behavioral data management, and I'd be interested to know how well I was able to do that. But at the very least, I learned a lot in trying to put in the presentation together, and I hope there was something in there that can be a takeaway for everyone who attended. So thank you very much for the invite, Alex. Thank you for having me talk again. There's contact info there. Do reach out if you have any questions on data. Do feel free to reach out and ask. And obviously would love to learn more about this stuff, what companies are doing. And if anyone has any questions today, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thank you. I've got, there's one question that's from Karen. Is Karen still here? Yeah, I don't know if Karen, did you want to ask that question, or has it kind of already been answered, do you think?
Yeah, I think to a certain extent it's already been answered, but I think I'm struggling a little bit with a lot of the terminology because I'm not familiar with it. So when you're talking about a pipeline, you're talking about a kind of a feed into a data store, so you can determine at one end what it is you want to collect and where it's coming from and what its format is, and then
that's absolutely right.
that's going into the cloud. Is that right?
Yeah, so the destination is often a data warehouse, which is just a big database, and in order to be able to do that, rather than just emit it straight into that database, it needs to go through some processing to try and identify what the event is, how you should store it, to decorate it with more information, to make sure it's valid, to manipulate it in any way that you want to manipulate it before you store the event. So there's an awful lot of logic that has to happen between sending that from the browser to being able to put it in the warehouse in a way that you can query later. So that whole bit from after it's been emitted to the collector, that's often the first part of the pipeline, to loading into the database, that bit's called your data pipeline.
Okay, thank you. And I was just in the middle of typing another question, actually. I can ask that quickly. And it was about behavioural data, because and about the definition of behavioural data, because I've sort of heard and seen about behavioural data in terms of clicking and page views on websites. But is it wider than that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. You can go some way with page views and link clicks. Like, they are two behaviours to track. But often there are micro behaviors that you'd be interested in on a website that are hard to stitch together with link click and page view information. And really all you're doing is making it so that rather than having to depend on that, you can define your own behaviors up front. So it might be subscribing or logging in, logging out, hovering over something, adding something. So that it's actually a really good way to describe it is using the product, so an e-commerce journey. So you've got add to basket, remove from basket, checkout, payment. All of those would be behaviors that you would want to track, that you don't want to have to go and infer that from page views and link clicks. It wouldn't be reliable. It wouldn't be very easy to do. So yeah, all of those things are considered behaviors. But if you go broader as well, so they're all things that you'd expect to find on an e-commerce website. But if you go into gaming or into apps, like things like whether the application is crashed or something like that, or whether your app has crashed, or whether it's been backgrounded or foregrounded, or when it was installed, when it was uninstalled, those kind of events are very interesting to understand, that you wouldn't get through a page view or a link click. So the only way that you can do it is to intentionally track that behavior.
Okay, thank you.
Great questions.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, I'm just intrigued. We use Snowplow extensively
awesome.
within our company. We do about 6 million events a day we collect. But we're doing a lot of, because at the moment we send it all to Redshift, so it gets aggregated in, we aggregate it ourselves in through a data lake. Is there any way in which that other people use it to aggregate on the fly or better? Because at the moment we're doing a lot of background processes after the event, which is obviously costly and takes a bit of time. Is there any other methods you know of, that ways in which we could aggregate the data to create journeys as well? We're trying to find pinch points in a journey. Yeah, so we do a lot of A/B testing and stuff like that, but yeah, it takes a lot of processing afterwards.
Yeah, so the processing can be minimized by, probably the best way to do it is to revisit the tracking strategy and have a look at the data. Most of the usage we see of Snowplow data is in the data modeling step.
Yeah.
Because that's the first time that you get where all the data is clean, readily available. It's been deduplicated. That you're working with a good set. So if you're finding that arduous, it might mean that there's advantages that could be had either in the tracking strategy or in the data models themselves. But we are seeing some customers start to hang more off the streams. So to go back to your question, Karen, about what is a pipeline, the pipeline is there to try and get data ready at rest into the data warehouse, but within the pipeline you can often have times that you can tap into the stream of data and put an application on there that's going to be able to take data off the stream on the fly and to do something with it. So there are opportunities with the Snowplow pipeline, both within enrichment or to hang something off the stream in order to be able to do some decisioning on the fly. But like I said, most of our customers work heavily with the models, and yeah, it suggests there, Ethan, that there might be some work to do on the tracking strategy, on the modelling steps themselves.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, we have like we collect both structured and unstructured events, and we've got contexts around those, but it's mainly that data, getting it in. Obviously we do track real time, but it's very expensive because we use Elasticsearch for that. And then the longer term, the more sort of in-depth analysis is all saved to Redshift, like I say. So last year I actually implemented automated testing of Snowplow data using Codeception, and it's really works really well. It's something I devised within the company, and it works really well, and it's actually reduced our bad data by, well, it's eliminated it pretty much, which is great.
That's great.
So
have you used Snowplow Micro, Ethan, for testing upstream?
No, I haven't yet.
Yeah, it's I mean, if you've already got your data quality issues down to 0, then perhaps there's nothing to do there. But it is quite interesting to be able to catch those issues pre-production, not rely on your testing in order to be able to capture that. But sorry, your kind of staging test in order to be able to capture those issues, but instead catch them even further upstream. But Ethan, definitely drop me a note, and your question on how to get the most out of your data, that's a great one to post on Discourse if you're not already on our Discourse forums. It might be worth dropping on.
I will do that.
Question on there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any more questions? Oh, sorry, I always like to double check just in case, but I end up putting a really weird face. Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you so much. That was amazing. Right, so I guess we'll just do a quick closing then. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you to our wonderful speakers, Lily Dedman and Steve Coppin-Smith. Our next talk is going to be on Thursday the 4th of February, and our talks are going to be DevOps, Applied Systems Thinking by Duncan Laurie, and Why I Hate Email and So Should You by Aaron Taylor. And just to say now, the talk with Aaron I think is going to be hilarious, so if you haven't, I definitely recommend coming to see that one. Oh, one other quick thing I'd like to say as well, I am looking for speakers, so if anyone is interested in giving a talk or knows someone is, please get in touch with me. Otherwise, I think we will stop the recording there. So thank you.